Ok, donc je vais procéder en anglais. I will proceed in English. Welcome to Conference Room Uranus. That's the actual name of the room. And I'm glad that I'm in Uranus today to discuss my research. So I'm here to talk about, I'm really glad that I was flown halfway across the Atlantic, halfway across the planet to present all my failures in crypto. Because they were so awesome that, Nadim, we need to fly you across the largest ocean in the world so you can come and talk about how terrible the crypto in Cryptocat is. So this is a talk about that, actually. So first I want to say thank you to JP Omasson, more like JP Awesomeasson, JP Badasson, okay, yeah, and then so on. And thank you for Sylvain Marais and all the other organizers for this very nice conference. I'm very appreciative of being here. So, encryption tools. Let's get started. When we talk about encryption tools, you can be optimistic about research, availability. You can be optimistic about variety. We have a lot of research going on. I don't think we're, lacking on encryption research. I don't think we're lacking on variety of tools. You have tools with encryption that have cats in them. That's, we have enough tools by now. That's how you know. And they're very available. They're open source software. It's very easy to get the tool. And even in the places where they're not available, you have very powerful governments. You have the State Department trying very much to make it available everywhere worldwide when there are places that are not, that don't offer encryption. But what about accessibility and usability? We have research, we have availability, we have security, we have encryption, we have a lot of stuff. But I think one thing we can all agree on is that encryption tools haven't really succeeded in being available, in an accessible fashion, in a usable fashion. Can you imagine, a stereotypical sort of older person, with novice computer skills using PGP or OTR? It's kind of difficult to imagine for the most of us. So this is something we can work on. And obviously, this is the goal of Cryptocat. The goal of the project is to try to make a web chat client. It's just as easy, as fun to use as Facebook chat. You want to use it because it's fun, because it's accessible, because using it is not a pain in the ass. And also, it offers higher levels of privacy, higher levels of encryption that Facebook chat doesn't offer. So it has OTR built in, it's open source software, it's developed in the open, and it protects your privacy with client-side encryption. So we want to combine something that's fun to use, like Facebook chat, so that people actually use it when they need to use it, with privacy properties that go unnoticed. So they're like under the hood, and the user doesn't really have to worry about them. And the way we decided to do this was you download the browser app. Why the browser? Because it's a very accessible, portable, universal medium. It's actually the most accessible, portable, universal medium ever right now, according to my personal opinion. And I think I'm convinced that this is the case. And so this is why I chose this medium. And this is why we're working on that, because of the portability and the accessibility. Because this is the medium where Facebook chat works. This is the medium where Google implemented Google Hangouts, Google Video Chat, Google Chat, regular chat. And so on a usability perspective, it's really a success. It's an easy success because we implemented a colorful, familiar, appealing interface, appealing features, ease of use features, accessibility features that studies translated to a lot of languages. So from the usability aspect, it's not really it's not particularly up for consideration whether it's easily kind of a success. But there's a lot of challenges when you pick the browser in making accessible crypto secure. And so ever since 2011, there's been a lot of stuff that we've had to do from scratch, a lot of bugs that we met along the way, a lot of things. Because when you're doing crypto in the browser, you're dealing with stuff that hasn't been done before. I mean, when we started working on Cryptocat, when I started working on it in 2011, Firefox and many other browsers didn't even have a secure random number generator. So the code delivery was kind of weird, and I'll talk about that now. And there were very kind of uncertain implementations of primitives like AES, for example. How do you implement that in JavaScript? Is it safe? What about timing attacks? And so on and so forth. What about all the attacks that C implementations and Python implementations and Java implementations have had like 20 years, to deal with? And in JavaScript, it's just it's brand new and all this stuff has to be redone. And so the random number generator issue, apparently, hopefully, fingers crossed, it's now fixed, because now there's a new standard for a random number generation in the browser called window.crypto.getRandomValues. And it uses, I think, dev_random via NSS. It uses native NSS calls to call dev_random, and this is kind of good. We use it to seed an internal salsa 20 random number stream cipher, which is used as a random number generator, and that seems to be okay. And Cryptocat was instrumental in getting that random number generator pushed into Firefox. It was already pushed into Chrome, but we really encouraged Firefox to push it, and also spoke with Opera about it. And so problems with code delivery, I'll be talking about that later, because throughout 2011, there was a big code delivery sort of issue. It wasn't really a bug, it was more of a vulnerability. And also, when you're dealing with the browser, you have to worry about sandboxing. Because how do you know that the browser tabs are separate in terms of CPU threads? Is that as solid as having separate applications running on your Windows machine or Linux machine or Mac machine? Because in Firefox, for example, there is no sandboxing. There is no separate threads for every browser tab. In Chrome, there is. And every time there's a Chrome competition, sometimes it gets broken, that's true, but every time it seems to be really hard for it to get broken, and the person who breaks it is always Ralph Philip Wyman, who, there's nothing he can't break really, so it's not really that big of a surprise. But it's still, in Chrome, the sandboxing seems to be certainly improving. In Chrome OS, especially, the sandboxing seems to be very impressive. And obviously, in the browser, there's a chance of a bigger attack surface. We don't really know how the attack surface changes. It might not be bigger, but it might also be because the browser loaded so much web content in separate tabs and so on. And so this really depends on the browser security aspect and on sandboxing and other related issues. And there's more research needed, because Cryptocat is the first of its kind to really try to address these issues with great seriousness, and try to make a usable encryption product that implements OTR and all that in the browser. So these issues need to be investigated more, and these are definitely some general browser issues that we have to deal with. They're not even Cryptocat specific, and yet obviously Cryptocat has to deal with them. And I think in general these have to be improved so that apps like Cryptocat can flourish in the next 5-10 years. Because I think that's the future, really. That's one very important future, and we have to make sure this happens without having to worry about all these security problems that we worry about now. The same way that C libraries got audited, the same way crypto in C got fixed in a decade, 2 decades, the same process has to happen again here for this new medium. C was a new medium once, and this is now the next new medium, and the same thing has to happen again. So I'm going to talk about all the big vulnerabilities. Obviously, I'm not going to cover like tiny, small vulnerabilities that didn't really have a big impact, but all the big vulnerabilities that I can remember, hopefully I haven't skipped any, I will cover during this talk and say why they happened and how we fixed them. So let's start with the first one. When Cryptocat started, I really wanted it to be very accessible. So I made it a website instead of now it's a signed browser plugin, but first it used to be a website. And you just would go to crypto.cat, it would download all the JavaScript and load it locally, and then you would have client-side encryption, and OTR wasn't implemented back then, but potentially you would have had OTR if we still used that model, all downloaded as a website and one client-side as JavaScript. And so this was really much more usable because you didn't need to install a browser plugin, and it was more awesome because we could just implement CSS files for BlackBerry and iPhone and Android, and you would have the same website that would work, offer an encrypted chat client on all browsers across all platforms like that. And that was like the apex of accessibility. However, there was a big debate about it on the internet regarding whether it was safe or not. And I actually stood my ground for the better part of a year, almost a year, and I said, no, this is okay as long as the server isn't compromised. As long as the server isn't compromised. So, obviously, more and more it became clear to me at the time that this is not a good idea. And so there was definitely, because the code was being sent from scratch, every time you open Cryptocat, there's a chance for man-in-the-middle attacks. There's a chance for code injection from the server. There's a chance for all that stuff to happen. If you have a SSL certificate forgery, you can selectively backdoor Cryptocat clients being sent, and so that's a big problem. And so for more than a year now, Cryptocat is now a signed browser extension only. We started with extensions for Chrome, and then there was one for Firefox, and then was one for Safari, and then there's a desktop application for Mac. And so more and more this medium is, and this medium is proving really popular because we didn't experience an impact on users when we switched to this medium, which was very surprising because I thought definitely would we experience an impact. I think, I mean, honestly, maybe we would have had more users more quickly, like the increasing users curve would have stayed higher, but we didn't get less users when we switched to that model. The number of users did not decrease, which is great because it means that you can implement more security that way without losing users, and that's what we want. We want to keep users, but also offer accessible security so that users want to use it, but also, you know, it's safe for them. That's the point of the project really, is to balance accessibility and security. It's like really being like the president of the United States and balancing between the Democrats and the Republicans. It's in a way, because really, like, I have a lot of debates all the time. You know, people in the security side are really angry at me because, oh, this security aspect is not good enough, and then I improve it, and then the people in the accessibility side are really angry because, oh, now this ruined the accessibility, and then you have to really balance. And at the core of Cryptocat, this is the core of the entire project. This balance. This is really the entire problem. So that's one bug. Another bug happened in November 2012, so almost a year ago. This was a very interesting crypto bug, not very uncommon. It's happened a couple of times. The reporter was Daniel Faucon, who is the Belgian computer programmer, and he's now a Cryptocat developer, and he helps out a lot, and I really appreciate his contributions. So basically, we were using AES. So first, let me explain something. For private chats, you know, one-on-one conversations, Cryptocat uses OTR, the agreed-upon standard, and that's great. We implemented OTR in JavaScript for the browser, thanks to the work of Arlo Bro, who is also a Cryptocat developer. And but for multi-party chat, because there is no agreed-upon standard, we've been experimenting with our own standard, which has led to like a couple of problems like this one. And some of the problems have been with the specification and others with the implementation. This is a problem with the specification. And I'll discuss another problem with the implementation later that had nothing, the specification was fine, but the implementation was buggy. So, by the way, we're working on that. We want to standardize Cryptocat into the multi-party chat, the group chat protocol, so they can have group chats. We want to standardize that into a multi-party real chat protocol published by, you know, a reasonable paper and peer-reviewed. And we're working on that right now. And we're getting closer because we're learning a lot. And I'll talk about this later, how much we've learned about group chat because of the experimentation with Cryptocat. Anyway, so this bug, basically, we used AES, the AES block cipher in CTR, in counter mode, for encryption. And because we did this, we needed to use a nonce. Do you guys know what nonces are in AES CTR? Yeah, Jean-Paul Amasson knows. Yeah, basically, nonces are, just to make this short, when you use AES in counter mode, you have, every time you encrypt, you have to use a special value with the encryption process. It's not a key, but you can send it in the public. It can be publicly known, not a problem. But the only thing is that it must never repeat with the same key. If you're using the same key, you can never use the same nonce twice. So you can use the same key for as many messages as you want, but the nonce has to change every time. It's called nonce because it means used once in cryptography. And so we thought we were doing that. However, it turns out that when you implement the specification, the nonce for both conversation parties start at 0 and they increment once for each message. So 0, 1, 2, 3 sounds fine, right? You're not using the same nonce twice because they're incrementing for each message. But obviously, this is kind of obvious. What happens is that if I have two people in the chat and both of them send a message at the same time, the nonce for each person is 0. So you have a nonce reuse because they're using the same shared secret because it's public key. So it's not really that hard to realize that something is wrong here. And that was the way it was broken. And so this is how it works, actually. Basically, if you have the ciphertext, which equals the plain text, and XORed by the AF, which is the AES function, which has as parameters the key and the initialization vector. Initialization vector means nonce, by the way, same thing. Initialization vector equals nonce. So you have the ciphertext, plain text, XORed with AES, and the AES has the key and the nonce. And then you do this twice, right? You have C1, which is plain text 1, AES encryption, same key, same nonce. Ciphertext 2, plain text 2, another plain text, same key, same nonce. And then these cancel out. And so you end up with ciphertext 1 XOR ciphertext 2 is equal to plain text 1 XOR plain text 2. Because these are the same and you're XORing them with the same value. And so that way you can, if you can do like just some elementary sort of matching of, if it's English, you can check for the E's and the T's, and you can just rudimentarily decrypt it. And you can even write like a program that does it for you, that checks for statistical likelihoods in decrypting the plain text, and you can get the plain text. So that was how that bug worked. That's how, I don't think an exploit for it was ever written or published. Maybe it was written but never published, hopefully never written. But that's basically how it would have worked. And so we fixed it. We fixed it by, instead of having a counter of nonces, we would generate a random nonce every time. And the random nonce would be communicated with the ciphertext when you're sending your message. And so, as I said before, even if nonces appear in the clear, that's not a problem. And the Cryptocat client would store nonces that were used in the conversation, either by you or by someone else, to make sure to never use them again. So every time a nonce is used, the Cryptocat client remembers, the program remembers, okay, this nonce was used. And if I see it again, if the program sees it again, it will give you an error that something very strange is happening. It'll warn you of a potential, compromise or an attack or someone trying to do something suspicious. And so far we haven't had any problems with that particular fix. By the way, if you're wondering what this thing is here, it's the mixed columns stage of AES encryption. I just put it there because it looks pretty, but it has nothing to do with the actual. It looks really nice though. Okay, so that's one bug. Also in November 2012, we had a very large-scale commercial audit, which was funded by the Open Technology Fund and was carried out by Cure53, which is Mario Heiderich and his team. And so they found a lot of bugs, but the critical bug that they found was that with Cryptocat, now you can have XSS bugs in your crypto. It was like a new, frontier. We were bringing XSS to the world of crypto. And so this is an important lesson, quite simply. I mean, we all know what XSS is, but this is an important lesson because it shows that when you're designing a crypto application, you can have a bug, in somewhere completely unrelated. I mean, the XSS was actually in how nicknames were displayed, and this has nothing to do with the crypto. But you can have a bug in somewhere completely unrelated, and it will still, completely compromise the security of the application, make people able to read plain text, inject code, see who you are, and do crazy stuff like that. I don't know whether this was possible, but I think definitely some bad stuff was possible with this particular vulnerability. So when you're programming an application, don't just focus on the crypto. You have to make sure everything is tight, because one compromise in a completely unrelated area can cause a compromise in the entire application. And so now, obviously we fixed the particular issue, but also Chrome has like some really impressive restrictions for browser apps, for local browser apps, plugins, extensions, that really prevent this sort of vulnerability from happening, even if we hadn't fixed it. And so that's very good. It severely limits code injection XSS attacks by implementing some very strict restrictions on what kind of JavaScript can be executed, even banning certain functions, banning certain sources of JavaScript, and certain methods of implementing and calling JavaScript. So you might have to rewrite some of your code, but ultimately it's very strict, but it's very good because it means that you force developers to keep in mind this sort of stuff. And this is a very interesting bug also. So, and then almost a year passed, and then in July, which was 4 months ago, not very long ago, we had two very interesting bugs. One kind of, sort of minor medium bug, not a very big deal, by Steve Thomas. And also Steve Thomas discovered another bug, which I'll cover in a bit, which was actually a biggest bug in the history of the project. But first, let's talk about this bug in a random number generator. So as I said, we had a random number generator, which was awesome. It was, dev random, as awesome as we can possibly make it. We thought we were doing a great job. Dev random, take the seed from dev random, put it inside Salsa 20. Salsa 20 is a great Daniel Bernstein, trademark, awesome random number generator / stream cipher. And then, but the thing is, so Salsa 20 was giving us bytes. Instead of, we needed decimals because we wanted to emulate math.random. We wanted to, and math.random, the sort of default JavaScript random number generator, which generates insecure random numbers, generates decimals. And so we wanted to emulate that and also generate decimals. And we did. We emulated it, and we converted the bytes to decimals by doing modulo 10 on the generated 0 to 256 value. But because of an off by 1 error, because we had, this tiny thing here, instead of, if x is less than or equal to, we should have put if x is less than 250. So we had like just an extra equal here. And this caused reasonable bias towards 0. And so on top of Steve Thomas discovering the bug, there was a very interesting and very well done blog post by Sophos Security. Paul Ducklin of Sophos Security made these interesting graphs. And they really do very well to show how the bug affected the decimals that were generated. So here, for example, at the bottom, you have from 0 to 9 decimals. And out of a sample of 100,000, from 1 to 9, it's all uniform. And it's all around 100,000. And then the 0 is 104,000. And so, this is a bias that might seem to be inconsequential, 100,000, 104,000, it's just a difference of 4,000 out of 100,000. It's not really a big deal. But if you generate sort of images of static that's produced by the random number generator, you actually see a pattern forming. I don't know if I hope you can see it on this slide. But so on the left, you have the fixed random number generator in blue. This is the correct one. And it looks like static. It's indistinguishable from random. It's if you turn on your television, you see the same thing. But on the right, you have the old school random number generator. And it looks static-y, but you see a grid here. You see like kind of a lattice. Can you see that? And so this is because of the bias. And so even like an inconsequential bug like this can eventually weaken entropy and make for example, cracking private keys more easier because you know what kind of bias the random number generator has. And so keep in mind, even though we had a great source of entropy, a great random number generator, because of this tiny bug here, just on off by one error, we still had this reasonable, it wasn't a critical security error, but still something you need to fix as soon as possible. And so it's very easy to make this kind of mistake. And finally, this is the biggest, it was published as Cryptocat, and it was published in July, and it was the most disastrous bug. The reputation of the project is still recovering, and it was a very big deal. And the reason for this is also, it's almost as small as this. Not exactly as small, but almost as small as this bug with the random number generator. So basically, we wanted to generate elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key pairs. And we made the private key 32 bytes. But instead of generating 32 bytes, because JavaScript doesn't have strict typing, you can define something as an integer and switch it to an object just by defining it as an object later. You don't even say var int or var string. You just say var in JavaScript, and all the variables. JavaScript doesn't even recognize that you switch types. Well, it does, but it doesn't tell you or anything. So the typing in JavaScript is very loose. And so instead of generating 32 bytes for the private keys in Diffie-Hellman, in elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, we generated 32 decimals. So instead of having 32 values that are from 0 to 256, or from 0 to 255, we had values, I just made almost the same thing I did here, but we had 32 values from 0 to 9. And this weakened the entropy of the elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman keys, which were used for a very important purpose in group chat, from almost 2 to the power 250, so 250 bits of entropy, to 54 bits of entropy, almost 2 to the power 54, around 2 to the 54. So 54 bits of entropy. And this is the code right here. You can see it. It's just the API for calling the randomness function was confusing and wasn't clearly written in a way that reduced mistakes. And because of that, we had it meant that this bug existed for at least 7 months in the code base, and it meant that for those 7 months, all group chat conversations, if you had the ciphertext, you could crack. If you had just a regular new computer like a MacBook Pro or something, you could crack it with just a couple of hours maybe at most. So this bug, this crazy giant bug, was missed by 2 audits by leading security and auditing firms. Q53, who found amazing bugs, missed this bug. And then Veracode, who found no bugs, missed this bug. And when Veracode found no bugs, we thought, this is a good sign. But still, there was this gigantic bug, bigger than all other bugs, just waiting there. And so, to me, This means that audits have their limit, obviously. I'm not saying audits are bad, but still, apparently it's not, if you get audited, it doesn't mean you're safe against the NSA or some bullshit like that. And so the possible reason this wasn't detected is because it's impossible to do unit tests for whether a public key looks good or not. What's a good, how do you do a unit test for whether this random number is good enough to be a random number? I mean, you can do like chi-square tests to see if it's like indistinguishable from random, but that doesn't tell you if it's a good private key. So this kind of unit test is, personally, I don't know how to do it. And I think it's quite hard to do some unit tests for those kind of things. And also, some languages, C has its own problems, for example, buffer overflows. JavaScript has its problems with XSS, for example, well, if you use it in the browser, that is. So the browser has that problem. But also, JavaScript has a problem with weak typing. And so that makes this kind of vulnerability, depending on the language that you're using, more likely to crop up. And if you're using JavaScript, this vulnerability is more likely to crop up. Just like if you use C, buffer overflows are more likely to crop up. And so these are the bugs that have been happening ever since that big one happened, the wrong data typing bug. We've been working very hard on trying to make sure this doesn't happen again. We hired this very famous person in the cryptography community, Zuko Wilcox O'Hearn. He's currently leading least authority systems, and he's working on the Tahoe LAFS system. He's a very awesome person, and we hope to get more sort of cryptographic feedback on that. So we hired him and his team, and starting yesterday, they are auditing the entire Cryptocat code base for 2 weeks. It's a full-time 2-week audit to make sure we don't have bugs like this anymore. Or try our best. But still, this is a good thing, that those bugs happened at an early time in the project's lifetime. Because all projects, PGP was based on a custom cipher that Phil Zimmerman made called Basomatic for the first couple of years of the project. And maybe we're, according to a cryptographer from MIT, he said maybe Cryptocat is still in the Basomatic phase. And so I feel we got some good feedback, and at least we dealt with the bugs more transparently. I've ranted and been vocal about some other projects not being transparent with their security disclosures before, and so I'm happy that when we have a security bug, at least we're very transparent about it. I'm here giving a talk about it. So tips for disclosure: be honest and transparent about your bugs if you have bugs like this. And by the way, if you're considering going into crypto, you will have bugs like this. Sooner or later, you're never gonna have a full career without having bugs at least this severe. And so take full responsibility for the bugs. Don't be afraid to do that. Fix your bugs quickly. Make sure to test your fixes before releasing them. And really, be truly open source, because you can say that you're open source and you can only update your GitHub repository once every 5 months and release a new version once every 2 weeks. You're not being open source, actually. Everything needs to be on GitHub before it's released. Otherwise, you're being a bullshitter, and that's not okay. And being open source when you're a security project is a very important thing for verifying security, for making sure that you're adhering to basic principles of how cryptography software is developed. And I think this is an extremely important point where there can be no debate. You have to be open source, and responsibly so. Obviously, you want to encourage audits. If people come and report bugs, you want to thank them, and you want to give them bounties if you have the money for it, and you want to help them find more bugs. And you learn from mistakes. Don't have to explain that one. And learn from mistakes and perfect your skills. So these are things to keep in mind when you're dealing with a disclosure, when you're dealing with a big bug. Tips in general, generally when developing a project. Be honest and transparent still applies. Be truly open source. These apply all the time. I've had a problem with Cryptocat. When you have a very popular project, you get a lot of trolling. And so this is actually like an issue. You have to know how to deal with them. You have to be inclusive, but you have to understand some people are really not constructive, and you have to keep them away from your project. So you have to really be patient. And for example, the guy who published Cryptocat, the big bug, he was very sort of aggressive in the way he published the bug, but we still invited him to the Cryptocat hackathon, and he was still very contributive. He fixed the bug, he submitted patches, he wrote code for Cryptocat, and he was very productive. So even when people are aggressive and even when people attack your open source project, they are still very capable of being productive. But you have to be able to differentiate that from people who are just there to, sort of discourage you and not let you do any good work. So that's a very important thing, I find. Also, you have to be very clear. This is something we've had a big problem with. You have to be very clear about security claims in your project. So basically, Cryptocat, in my personal opinion, has, to its very best, been always extremely clear on what it doesn't do. This is a warning that's very prominent on the website. And also, when you open Cryptocat, it has a big warning every time you open it that says, what Cryptocat doesn't do, experimental software, blah, blah. On the GitHub repository, we have a big warning like that in the README, at the very top of the README. And so, unfortunately, even though we have all those warnings, when you go and have journalists talk to you, and you tell them, this is experimental software, this is blah blah, but they want to write a big story, and so they end up saying Cryptocat was being developed by Nadim Kobeissi. That's an Arabic-sounding name. He obviously made it for the Arab Spring because he's Arab, and so yeah, revolutionary bullshit. And so honestly, a lot of people are very angry because of this false coverage, but no one in the world is more angry than me, because it has made my life hell, because people think that I'm sort of fooling activists into trusting experimental software. And even though I put warnings everywhere, and I say, look at the website, look at the app, there's warnings everywhere. They've been there for years. They say, well, no, Wired said you should use this to overthrow your government. And still it overrides all the warnings everywhere. And so this is really kind of a big time waster, a big demoralizer, and I don't know what to do about it. I'm very, the press has stopped doing that, but there was a big article by the New York Times and a big article by Wired that sort of made the project appear dishonest. And so that's very annoying. And also, you can be a cat. It's right here. I think that's, yeah, and also you have to, so it's very easy to burn out when you're working on an open source project, a security project, when you have people using it. So for example, I know for a fact that, whether I like it or not, there's people in Syria using Cryptocat. This is true. And so this is a very big responsibility for me, because I do my best to make sure it's, delineated as experimental software. But then again, if those people are only stuck with using Facebook chat or Skype, am I going to tell them, no, don't use Facebook chat or Skype? I'm going to tell them, no, don't use Cryptocat, use Facebook chat. Obviously, I would never do that. I think Cryptocat is a very good replacement for Facebook chat. I would definitely recommend that an activist use Cryptocat if their only tool, other tool is Facebook chat. Would I recommend it if their only other tool was PGP? Hell no. They should use PGP. They should use, other things that have been there for 30 years. And so we try to help by making, for example, so when the Snowden thing came out, with all the focus on metadata, we published on the blog post this graph that shows, who has your metadata when you use Cryptocat? What's the metadata that's available to the Cryptocat server you're connecting to? What's the metadata available to your ISP when you're connecting to a Cryptocat server and using Cryptocat? And here you can see, for example, that when your nickname, for example, your nickname can be seen by the Cryptocat server, but it cannot be seen by the ISP. But I potentially can still, see your nickname if I wanted to. But obviously, I don't see your nickname, because we have a very strict privacy policy. And also, you can set up your own server, by the way. For example, obviously, Cryptocat does not see the contents of conversations, of course. Neither does the ISP. And you can, we try to publish guides and, things like that all the time and make sure people are aware. But it's hard, because people are always, the misinformation spreads so much faster than information. It's really annoying. And so we started in 2011, and the state of browser crypto, as I said, at the beginning, was almost non-existent. We had to do a lot of stuff from scratch. But because, we had a lot of support, we had some good, not an amazing amount of funding. Basically, our funding so far has been less than $90,000 since the beginning of the project. But because we had that funding, we were able to do audits. We were able to do a lot of, get a lot of good stuff done. And there's been, undeniably, this is a successful project. In light of everything that's happened, in light of all the drama and life-changing experiences I've been through working on this project, I consider Cryptocat a success, because we have made advancements in making crypto usable, advancements in being transparent, in being really open source, and in engaging the community in debate, and not hiding behind weasel words, and really going for a true and agreed upon balance between accessibility and security. And more than 80,000 people a month are using Cryptocat for this purpose. And I get emails from people, there's this lady who is a middle school teacher, and she uses Cryptocat to teach her students about internet privacy and why it's important. Sometimes you get emails that are from people who are, for example, there's an LGBTQ, transgender, bisexual, gay community counseling center in Montreal, and they use Cryptocat to do counseling because that way when you're discussing something really private, like your decision to change genders, you will be safe and you will have some privacy for that. And that's it's obviously the NSA, I don't think they're interested in like surveying people's transgender decisions, but it's still nice to be able to have that privacy. That's the point of the project, to make privacy accessible. The point of the project isn't to make privacy accessible for activists, it's to make privacy accessible for everyone. Because, for example, yesterday I was talking to this girl I'm dating over Facebook. And then this true story, like not related, like I didn't prepare the story for this talk, but I just remembered. I was talking using Facebook chat, and then I said, hey, can we switch to Cryptocat? Because like, the conversation became kind of personal. And this is what I use it for. I mean, I'm not really that big shot activist guy. I use Cryptocat for just to protect my privacy. And we have overcome, obviously, a lot of technical challenges, discovered a lot of bugs. And yeah, I mean, it's a success story for making crypto usable. There's a great study of group chat encryption now. OTR in the browser was implemented. And also the W3C is implementing native AES, native SHA-512, native crypto primitives in the browser, native RSA in the browser, callable via JavaScript. And Cryptocat is a primary use case of that web crypto API spec that's being written right now. It's almost done, by the way. And so that's great. So the overall outlook, more scrutiny than other projects means that you improve quickly more than other projects, and definitely a project that's experimental like this needs to improve very quickly because otherwise it'll remain experimental and sort of dangerous to use forever. And as I said before, the third audit right now is underway by a very good cryptographer called Zuko. I really respect his work. And also, I've been going around and trying to meet with people. For example, I met with Bruce Schneier a week ago, 2 weeks ago in Boston. And I discussed with him, this is how it works, this is how we're doing. I basically gave him this presentation almost, but without the slides. And I told him, this is what we're doing, so let us know if you have feedback. And his feedback was positive. He gave a lot of positive feedback. He was very encouraging, and I felt like I was doing something that's worthwhile. And so, as I said, you can use Cryptocat. Even if you're an activist, go ahead and use Cryptocat, but only if Cryptocat is an alternative to only Facebook chat. If your only other option is Skype or Facebook chat, by all means, use Cryptocat right now. It's safer, it's better, but it's, hopefully, in the circumstances I can imagine, unless there's something I didn't think of, I hope it's better. But, don't use it obviously as a replacement for PGP or as a replacement for more tested, tried and true technology. Never do that, because PGP is literally more than 10 times older than Cryptocat. It has 10 times the time to be better than Cryptocat. So at least we have the community review. At least we have the stuff, that kind of stuff that Skype doesn't have. People today, there's a kind of big problem, and that's why the articles from Wired and the New York Times get the wrong kind of attention to Cryptocat, because people today, they think, let's solve a surveillance apparatus built thanks to strong shared realist foreign policy conviction doubled by domestic assurances with an app, because there's an app for that, right? There's no app for that. It's bullshit. You can't solve surveillance. You can't solve spying. You can't really protect your privacy entirely with one app that you download for your browser that made by a guy who started working on it when he was 21. That's not how it works. So there's a cat face palming. I thought it was really cute. But yeah, this is a real problem that people, this is why Cryptocat gets misinterpreted, because people think that we're feeding into that illusion, but really it's an illusion. It's a dangerous illusion. Because I know people in Syria, and I know people in Iran, and other places, and I know how it's like for them, and it's really very frustrating when they misunderstand those things, because sometimes, I can tell you a couple of horror stories of what happens, and I've heard them firsthand from when people don't understand their computer security that well in those places. So yeah, finally, just a little slide to say that localization matters. Translate your projects, make sure they're compatible internationally. It's nice to do that. I think here in Europe, it's more obvious that people realize that, because Europe is more diverse than the US. In the US, it's kind of harder to get people to realize that. They only translate, like in the community I work in, it's like available in English and Farsi, because the State Department is funding it, and they want it in Farsi. I wonder why. But like, it's not available. It's like translated to Farsi before it's translated into French. It's weird. And then Tibetan before French. Well, I wonder why Tibetan. But so yeah, this is important. And yeah, this is what I came here for. JP Omasson is an awesome cryptographer, and he invited me here so I can talk about you know, a real world case scenario. I'm a guy like actually who has had some experience in dealing with implementing crypto, dealing with crypto bugs, how to fix them, how to communicate about them, how to improve software, and also most importantly, how to persevere, because you have to believe in yourself and you can't let yourself burn out and stop working, because you know, I almost burned out at one point, and then Dan Kaminsky, who was also a respected you know, computer security researcher, told me, yeah, Nadim, you should totally give up, because the moment you give up, all of your trolls are going to start writing the best crypto software ever, and they're going to publish it immediately. And so, you know, this made me laugh a lot, actually, and I sort of bounced back. And so, yeah, I mean, obviously, you can contact these slides will be available online. Hopefully, this talk will be available online also. Hi, Internet. And I'd be happy to take questions, actually. Thank you. Okay, questions? Oh, sorry. I'm gonna take JP's question first, because he invited me here. Do we have a translation in Catalan? Actually, interesting story. Cryptocat has a crypto.cat domain name. The website is crypto.cat. As you know, if I gave you a sticker, if I haven't given you a sticker, please ask me for one. I have a lot of stickers. The cat is for Catalonia. And it's legally mandated in the state of Catalonia that if you want to have a crypto.cat domain name in general, all of your content has to be translated into Catalan. So we had Catalan before we had like any other language than English. The website is the only language the website is available in other than English is only Catalan. The app itself is available in 35 languages, and Catalan was the first one other than English. And once we redesigned the website, and I forgot to like retranslate into Catalan, and I got a very angry email from a lawyer in Catalonia being like, in 48 hours we are going to shut down your domain name because you are violating Catalonian law. And like, and I had to, and also if you go to Cryptocat and you scroll all the way down, you will see like links, regular links, like, you know, link to the source code, link, and then you will see a link that says discover Catalan culture. It's like completely unrelated, and we have to put that link there. We have to put links to Catalan culture to like keep the domain name. So, yeah, that's the answer to that. It's really weird, but also, I mean, kind of nice. The people at the domain registry are actually really nice, so it's not a problem. You had your hand raised first.
So you got a few paid audits by third parties companies. Where did you get money from?
Where did we get the money for the audits that we got from the paid companies, was the question. It was from the Open Technology Fund, which is a branch of Radio Free Asia, which is a nonprofit in the US. And they fund, the Open Technology Fund is basically a US government fund for open source projects, namely open source privacy and security project. They also fund Tor. That's another big project that they fund. They fund Text Secure and Redphone, right? They fund that. And they fund a lot of other big projects. And by the way, just let me say, Open Technology Fund and Open ITP, another much smaller funder, have been like very amazing, and I thank them for their support. And that's how I get to pay for audits. It's without them, Cryptocat would never exist the way it does today. So yes, any other questions?
So first, I want to thank you for. So first, I want to thank you.
It's not working. I'll repeat your question. So yeah.
The pieces of code that had flaws and like showing the path. It's really cool to see that. My question is, have you considered using a type version of JavaScript and then type check the code and then drop the types and checking what TypeScript does?
Quite frankly, that would be a very interesting thing to do. When it comes, so we had already considered that in a different way. So the question was, why don't we implement some sort of typing, like data typing into JavaScript via TypeScript, for example? And so we had already considered that in a different way, which is to use ECMA script to write Cryptocat in C and then convert it into JavaScript. And that way you fix that problem. And this is another thing, for example, do it in TypeScript, and that's maybe even more straightforward. And these are actually very good suggestions. I don't see anything wrong with them. What I saw wrong with the ECMA script suggestion is that maybe while compiling cryptocode from C to JavaScript, ECMA script would inadvertently introduce some crypto errors, because I don't know if ECMA script was specifically tested for cryptocode, because cryptocode tends to be really sort of specific and has a very different sort of array of bugs that pop up very differently from whether you're compiling a video game from C to JavaScript. And so TypeScript, I think, is a much safer thing to do, because it doesn't have this whole, I don't know, maybe it does. I'm actually very new to TypeScript. But I don't know anything about it, actually, other than the fact that it exists. But if it doesn't, I definitely think this would be something cool to investigate. And if you have time, maybe you can open an issue on GitHub. I'll open one myself either way, but like if you want to contribute, tutorials, tips, suggestions, the GitHub, Cryptocat is very active on GitHub. All the issues are discussed publicly on GitHub. All the code is pushed publicly on GitHub before being published. The GitHub of Cryptocat is very, very recent, very transparent, and very open. So any other questions? Okay, well, that's it. Thank you, Jean-Philippe, again, and thanks, everyone.